Dublin 1916, and an event that will lead to the creation of a new state, the Irish Republic, is played out against a bloody background, where almost 500 people will lose their lives and 2,500 were injured, half of which are innocent civilians who took no part in the rising. The people of Dublin's Northside played a major role in the rebellion, and to this day relatives of those who fought and died still live and work in the area. In March 2016, Near TV visited local groups to witness their celebrations of the most important event in the history of our country. Of the 1,200 or so people who actually turned out in April 1916, almost 300 of them were trade unionists and fully trained members of the Irish Citizens' Army, led by the Marxist James Connolly. During the celebrations, SIPTU, the largest trade union in Ireland, will be unveiling plaques around the city to commemorate the Irish Citizen Army, and we were at the Marino College.
The Irish Citizens Army left here on this site in the Easter 1916, and they went to two garrisons. One was the GPO and one was Stephen's Green. Today we're going up to Marino College to unveil a plaque to commemorate the local people from the North Strand who served in the Irish Citizens Army. And this is the first in a series of plaques that will be erected around the city by the SIPTU Dublin District Council and in conjunction with community groups around the city.
So we're here today for a local commemoration to remember members of the Irish Citizen Army who came from this area. Of course, the Citizen Army is a very important part of the story of revolutionary Ireland, even if they were a small enough organisation in terms of numbers. They were very much the armed wing of the trade union movement, and though they fought in 1916, they were born out of earlier events. They came out of the lockout of 1913. It was a unique organisation for a number of reasons. Primarily its members came from the working classes, unskilled workers in particular, but also had quite a number of female participants, women that took an active role in the rising. In fact, the only woman wounded in the fighting, Margaret Skinner, was a member of the Citizen Army. And they have very close connections to this area because the Citizen Army often drilled at Croydon Park, a premises that was purchased by Jim Larkin for their use. So they're being remembered here today by the relatives of ICA members and by local people.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's significant, as Donal said, was that the ICA were born out of the working class and the trade union struggle, particularly the lockout. And the ICA really goes through several phases. During the lockout, they're developed really to defend the workers from the attacks of the police, and also because strikebreakers were being armed by the employers. And the Citizen Army at the end of the lockout has probably got 1,000 members. It's not armed with firearms, it has staves and hurleys and sticks. It doesn't have a uniform, just wears an armband, often drilled by ex-British soldiers because there'd been a big tradition among the unskilled workers in Dublin of joining the British Army. So a significant number of Citizens Army members were ex-British soldiers. And then you have characters like Captain Jack White, who's actually from an Ulster Protestant Unionist background, Boer War veteran, who's very central to the organisation of the first phase of the Citizens Army. It was really during the summer of 1914, then you see the Citizens Army, much smaller but now organised in a more professional way, drilling at Croydon Park, as Donal says, wearing a uniform, carrying the Starry Plough flag for the first time, and also beginning to acquire firearms. And then into 1915, 1916, with the impact of the Great War in Europe and Connolly's desire to join in a rising, you see the later stages of the Citizens Army, the one that we all know that's out in Easter week.
As part of the Two Cities One Book event, we went to St Stephen's Green to meet the author of this year's chosen book, Fallen, which was launched in both Belfast and Dublin.
And the book this year is Fallen by Leah Mills, and it's set in 1916, and it's the story of what life was like in 1916 for the ordinary people, how they managed when they woke up on Easter Monday morning and there was gunfire and looting and all sorts, how they managed in that week. Stephen's Green plays a crucial part in the book. The main character comes along and she meets her, what we think will be her future boyfriend, possibly her future husband. And of course, as we know, on Easter Monday, some of the first shots to be fired in the rising happened here on the Green, the steps of the Shelburne actually. And trenches were dug in the Green, and then the College of Surgeons, which is just behind us, was also involved. So the Green was a very appropriate place to launch the Dublin programme for Two Cities One Book.
It started with a question, really, what would it be like to wake up one morning and find your city taken over by forces you don't recognise? If you didn't understand what was going on or who was behind it, or if you didn't know where it was going to end, what would that be like? So it's a novel about the city, really, and about ordinary citizens trying to survive during a violent week. Katie Crowley is the main character. She's a young woman and her twin brother is killed during the Great War, during the Second Battle of Ypres. So he's killed in 1915 and the Easter Rising actually begins on the anniversary of his death.
The second bloodiest event of the Rising occurred at North King Street, where 15 civilians were shot or bayoneted to death by soldiers from the South Staffordshire Regiment. Frank Shouldice was a sniper for the rebels. We met his son and grandson to reflect on the role Frank played during the Rising.
Dad, just as coming up to Easter 2016, it's 100 years later. I mean, here we are in North King Street. What significance does that have for you?
Well, principally, it was the area in which my father saw action. The whole time of the Rising, he was stationed here under the command of his brother Jack.
So that was Frank and Jack?
Yeah, they were both here, but Jack was the commanding officer of that battalion.
And the company where they were, where did they take up position along North King Street?
Well, they built the barricades to start and manned them and the pub adjoining.
And where was Grandpa, your father, Frank, where was he stationed?
Well, he never told me in any detail about it, I have to say. The only thing that he actually informed me on was where he took up position in the malt house.
The Jameson Malt House?
Yeah. That's all I learned really of his actions. He was at the top of the malt house in an opening. There was an opening up there and an aperture, and he told me that, and a platform outside.
So he was a sniper up in the tower. That
he was
gave
up
him
there.
The view.
He said that he was near. That was when he related the fact that he was nearly shot there. The bullet grazed his cheek.
When you hear this passage, like from the high malt house, Frank Shouldice lying out on an iron platform at the top of the outside stairway, poured down an accurate fire on the houses along the north side of the street, picking out his targets by the answering flashes of their rifles. I mean, what do you think when you hear that?
I'm very proud of him. I didn't realise he was such an accurate shot.
A major exhibition of 1916 artefacts with over 500 items on display and a series of sets of actual places and events of the time has opened in the Ambassador Theatre under the title Revolution 1916. We got a guided tour from the creator of the event.
We're at the Revolution 1916 exhibition here at the Ambassador.
Well, this building that we're in, Adrian, is very important because this is the building that the volunteers from 1916 they signed up in 1913. Well, we have a museum section where we have the largest private collection of 1916 artefacts on loan to us from the Irish Volunteers commemorative organisation, and they include an original proclamation and a half proclamation, Thomas Clark's Black Mauser rifle, and two other infantry gear 1871 models. They're known as a Hoth. That's a Lee Enfield replica. The Irish Volunteers would have had, it was a British rifle, 303. It is heavy, and again, everybody says when you pick up a weapon that it's very heavy. That's because you don't carry one now, or you shouldn't carry one now. recreated the 1916 landing at Kilmainham, and we give you access. You're able to walk into the condemned cell. So we have an exact replica of Pierce's cell recreated here, where you can sit in it, and we want you to feel like they felt in the emotion of being in a condemned cell, taking your last walk down the corridor.
Right, so we're here in the lobby of the Ambassador, and there's some beautiful murals on the wall behind us. They've been specially done, I believe, for this exhibition.
Yes, Adrian, they've been specially done by Danny Devaney and his Belfast artist crew, who came down here and over 6 weeks have done murals on both gable ends of this lobby here. And they trace the story from mythological Ireland, things that inspired the volunteers in 1916, and all the way up here to where we're featuring the women of the revolution, because in 1966, when they did the 50th anniversary, it was all about the men of 1916. So the women's role and Cummin na Bun's role has been airbrushed into history. So in the famous surrender picture, where Pierce is surrendering to General Lowe, Elizabeth O'Farrell stepped back out of the way when the photographer came up and always regretted it. Right, so now we brought her face forward a little bit into it so she can be seen. And then here, right beside her, Adrian, is their central feature of the exhibition. It's a girl called Molly O'Reilly, and at 16 years of age, she's raising the flag of Ireland, the green flag with the yellow harp, above Liberty Hall on Palm Sunday, 1 week before the Rising.
Yes, from the art. But now in the sculpture, she's also pulling 4 men behind.
Yes.
What's the meaning of that?
It's a symbolic act of defiance. So by her flying the flag of Ireland 1 week before the Rising, she's pulling 4 figures from the mire, and they represent the 4 provinces of Ireland that are waking up from their slumber, that this revolution is about to happen.
Very good, very good. It's a good message.
That this other quote where he was talking about when they stormed Riley's fort, and I was just looking for it here, but anyway, the gist of it was that they sent about 15 Tommies, as he called them, in running towards Riley's fort and then down Beresford Street, and that he just said, we knocked them over one by one.
Yeah.
And he said it was an awful slaughter.
Yeah. Well, it was an intense engagement, but I can't add to that.
But he had that choice, like if he didn't shoot, he'd have been shot. But they were sent to kill him.
Yeah.
The local community radio station Near FM ran 3 nights of discussions and debate on the women of 1916. Locals came out in large numbers to listen and take part.
To do something in the community that we work in, to mark and remember and talk about, discuss the women in 1916, and not just the the famous, the well-known household names. Also, we wanted to look at what life was like and what social justice and social conditions were like for women at that time compared to now, and whether there's been any differences really.
Most of the women, they were forgotten about, and their role was forgotten about, and they didn't get the equal Ireland that they expected. I mean, it was quite unique in the time. When you think that women didn't even have a vote, the suffragettes were fighting for a vote for women, and here they were they had a proclamation for the new state of Ireland, where Irish men and Irish women were mentioned, and where women were given very much an equal role in the Easter Rising. You know, some of them took up arms and some of them didn't, but the same with the men. But they had very much an equal footing, and they were very much respected. And I think they felt afterwards that they were ignored. Some of them that did apply for pensions didn't get them. Some of them didn't apply for pensions. I know she didn't apply for a pension because she didn't recognise the type of state.
And they're really only stories that we're hearing recently, like in the last 5 years, I would say, that we're really only hearing the stories. And when you think about...
Yeah, it's the 3rd and final night. So we've looked at some really interesting contributions from speakers. We've looked at, why women got involved in 1916, what their motivations were. We've looked at what the economic situation was like for women. We've had a relative of one of the women come and speak to us. We've also looked at what crime and punishment were like at the time. So we've looked at the kind of crimes that women ended ended up in jail for around the time of the rising, and the reason that they did things like looting. So this final week then we're going to be looking at what the social conditions for women were at the time, living in tenements and so on, and also what, you know, the law and social justice was like for women at the time.
And those homes that they left in places like Mountjoy Square, which, you know, were fine places, in Parnell Square as well, like they were taken over by sort of a landlord consortiums. So you'd have groups of landlords who would own the buildings, and no one person was responsible, you know, for the upkeep, say, or the maintenance of them. So they deteriorated quite rapidly, and they split those buildings, as people are quite aware of how the tenements developed, that you've got a lot of families living in these buildings, which once housed one family.
The audience, as always, is the community, so our local community here and also the wider community. And we wanted people to kind of think about and to get to know what life was like for the women, and also to kind of put it in the context of where we are now, and whether the ideals that those women might have had in terms of equality and social justice and all of those important issues, whether we've arrived anywhere 100 years down the line, and whether it's affected life for people in our community.
Well, the figure 14 has been mentioned, I think.
It was 14, yeah.
Yeah.
But they were killed because what was happening up at Riley's Fort where the barricades were, that the regiment, the South Staffordshire Regiment, were so frustrated at not being able to get past.
They lost the head.
They lost the head. And General Maxwell, when he was quizzed about it, he said the men saw red. And this was the explanation. But what happened, and it was kept, there was 14 men who were pulled out of houses who weren't involved in the rising, and each of them were executed and buried in shallow graves. This all came to light subsequently, and there was a whitewash after. There was one very telling thing, actually, that when Frank and Jack arrived in, they bumped into a young fella who they knew through football and who was in the volunteers, and they asked him to join them, and he didn't, because he said he wasn't going to get involved in the rising, and he went home, and he was one of the 14 men who was then murdered in the North King Street massacre.
Oh, so, really?
And Jack said afterwards that had he have come with them, he probably would have lived.
Part of the Cabra Historic Society. A society was set up in Cabra in 2009 to get the history of Cabra and note it down and sort of go through and log it down for prosperity. We had an old community, and as the 1916 rising was coming up, we set up a reenactment group in 2015, and we wanted to represent the Citizen Army, the Irish Volunteers, and coming them on. This is a community thing, because a lot of the people who come from early were involved in the rising, who settled in Cabra in 1930 and 1940. So it's to celebrate that, but it's also to celebrate today and the inequality in our society. We're here as a community to say this is what we stand for. And the men and women who went into that building over there, they were the people, the visionaries, who set out the blueprint for us to go forward as a nation and a society. And that's what we're here, and we're really, really proud here. Today is an event with Gael School Barra. It was the Irish School in Cabra, which was set up by the members of Nathan Barra GA Club, like a big community festival. So 16 to us is a big thing. We do it ourselves from a community point of view. We leave across the politics, but the politics is about our nation, about the vision of equality, and about going forward and building a society that everybody, all the children in the nation can be equal, and that our country once more will be free from the borders, from the north to the south.
Well, we're celebrating the 1916 rising. Mary O'Neill Grogan. I came from Wolftown Street, just around the corner. We're in the Cabra Folklore Society. This is my grandmother's handbag, which is 100 years old. And I also have our rosary beads in it. And we treasure it, so we brought it around here. I'm sure it was here 100 years ago. Well, I have our rosary beads and all here. You would like to bless yourself with them?
The men were so exhausted by Friday night that they felt they had repelled the attack, but they must have known the number was up though. They were outnumbered 20-1 at that stage. They couldn't hold out. They'd run out of ammunition.
It's also interesting to consider that they wanted to fight on, and when the surrender was brought to them, and they were told to lay down their arms, a number of them didn't want to. They wanted to keep fighting. Also, I found it curious that he offered his troops to go home if they could slip away before, and some of them did. They didn't. They left their guns and went home, which is remarkable. So they took part in the second bloodiest action, and then they went home. You know,
there was a very funny point made by the manager or the owner of Jameson after, who specifically made the point that even though the men had access to Jameson distillery, they didn't touch any of the stock and they didn't go near anything, and the only thing they took was a selection of his private cigars. And to which he said that he just wanted to commend the men on their taste, that they showed really good taste in taking the cigars he had.
The Sean O'Casey Community Centre in East Wall has a thriving historical society, and they teamed up with the Gallery of Photography to engage with local people in sharing and documenting their photographs and other items of importance from the Rising.
Now, as a lot of you probably know, there were a lot of people from around this area either fought in the Citizen Army or in ERF Company of the 2nd Battalion of the Volunteers. But what not so many people know is the Rising actually came right down into the Docklands. And there was very, very fierce fighting in the Docklands.
Just talk a little bit about my grandfather, Peter Carpenter, who was a member of the Irish Citizen Army back in 1916, and his brother, Walter Carpenter, who was often in charge of the Boy Scouts Brigade.
My name is Brendan Maher. I'm from the Gallery Photography in Meeting House Square in Temple Bar, and I work there as the digital archivist, and I'm here this evening as part of our 1916 commemorative events, looking for paraphernalia, photographs and objects related to 1916 Rising.
Both him and himself were in the GPO garrison. Walter during the day, the Monday, he spent Monday night out in Annesley Bridge, returning back during the evening time with Oscar Traynor back into O'Connell Street, where they marched up along and crossed over along the Cleary side of this now, as it's known, crossed over, met by James Connolly, and he ended up in the Hotel Metropole.
To arrange this type of evening to go to a local community, to find a local community's hidden heritage, I suppose, in some ways, through the photographs, and to build up a wider photographic knowledge around 1916 and the environments that it occurred within. So it's even we had people from the local community bring photographs of members of the family who fought in 1916. We've also had people come with medals which were awarded to their family members as a result of their fighting in 1916. And we've also had other objects come from this time period. Around 1916, we've had a medal awarded to the widows for the combatants killed from the British Army in World War I. Photographs from the local community that show more of a history of the area. They'll fit into a larger project that we operate within the gallery called the Photo Album of Ireland project, which looks at local histories and the Irish national history through the perspective of families' photo albums. Widow's medal. I've seen photographs but never held one in my hands, and they're quite large. They're approximately 5 inches across, which came as a surprise to me, and individually inscribed for each person who'd passed away as a result of the war.
At the end of the week, Peter was captured and was sent over to England. He was in Northside prison and then transferred down to Frongoff. He arrived back in Dublin on Christmas morning in 1916.
It's very similar in respect to other areas where people don't know the history of a photograph. It's something they've kept because they like the image, but they don't know who's in the photograph, why the photograph was taken, or where the photograph was taken. So that means it's not of use to, or not of interest to other organisations who deal with archives because they need all that specific information. But as the Photography Gallery is an artist organisation, we look at these objects differently. We look for their aesthetic quality. We looked for an interesting photograph, something that can tell a story of an area, of a people, of a time, of a place that doesn't need its historical backup.
Do you think they got the gratitude they deserved for what the sacrifice they made?
No, some of them didn't, obviously. You know, and some of them did very well out of it.
And in Grandpa's case?
Well, you know, when he escaped from Usk jail, there were 4 of them in it. One of them was Joe McGrath, who became the wealthiest man in Ireland at the time. The others were very humble men.
The rank and file of
and
the
did not get anywhere out of it. Which caused some question. I mean, they didn't want necessarily, or didn't expect it, but they still could have been rewarded, you know. It wasn't a question of expectancy, or they felt that it was their due to be rewarded.
But do you think that in terms of recognition, do you think they got the recognition?
But they didn't. No, some of them didn't. But then others did.
When did Grandpa pass away?
1974.
And how old was he?
83. He was in his 84th year.
And
which I am now.
You're 84, he was 83.
I've passed him out.